Hello everyone, I'm Susan Lee MacDonald and welcome back to my show, The InnerView. In order to be the best in your chosen field, it requires a lot of discipline and sacrifice to hone in your talent and skills. Today, we're going to meet someone who has devoted more than 50 years of his life to the amazing art of drumming. You're going to meet none other than the legendary jazz drummer, Billy Hart. He's an incredible person who has worked with some of the best performers and musicians in the world in modern history, and I know that you'll be inspired by his story. Join me and meet him today. Billy Hart, a jazz drummer and educator, is the leader of the Billy Hart Quartet, comprised of talented musicians, and is regarded as a living witness to jazz history. After entering the jazz world in 1957, he performed with some of the top jazz musicians in history. After broadening his musical spectrum, he released his debut album titled Enchance in 1977 and left a strong impression on the listeners. Over the course of 50 years, he took part as a sessionist in the recording of more than 600 albums, and demonstrated a jazz technique under the concept of modern creative to the world. Billy Hart, a renowned jazz master in the music industry, is praised for having opened up new horizons in jazz music with his innovative sound. Let's take a glimpse into his life story and passion for music. Hello, and thank you so much, Billy Hart, for being on my show, The InnerView.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, you're here in Korea, thousands of miles from your home in New Jersey and Ohio and all that. What brings you here to Korea this time?
I was invited, and not only was I invited by the Koreans themselves, but their enthusiastic response to some of the members of my team, and they also wanted me to come. So it's not only the invitation by the Koreans, but that the members of my band seemed to like me enough to want me to come too.
Well, you've gotten incredible reviews here by music enthusiasts. I mean, a seriously explosive response from jazz enthusiasts, musicians, and audience members who have followed music for quite some time. And I'm curious what types of things you've heard from some of the Koreans that you've performed with, if they've been brave enough to come and talk to you.
Well, but there's a certain familiarity. They don't just come to you and say, "Oh man, you've given me something I've never seen before." They'll say, "Well, I haven't felt like this since I heard Charlie Parker," but it requires the fact that we both share that same understanding, and we'll say, "Well, thank you, but wow, yeah, you too," So it's something that we have in common that we're sharing. So they bring up, it's a compliment, but it's just bringing up something that we enjoy, that we have in common.
But jazz is relatively new for Koreans and for kind of a nation of people that are not really used to the kind of free form that most people associate with that American classical music. It's not always easy for them to kind of grasp immediately and how to play. I'm curious, what has your experience been in working with some of the Korean jazz enthusiasts? Has it been easy or difficult to kind of
Well,
talk to me about that?
it's like the public all over the planet, really. I mean, it's the concept of jazz or American classical music is new to everybody. I mean, it's new. It's barely 100 years old. So it bears becoming familiar with, right? And there's obviously some reasons for that. It's because it's one of the first places I know of where there are contributors from all over the world. In other words, you have Korean Americans, you know, African Americans, Native Americans, French Americans, Russian Americans. So it's a country and a music that has contributors from all these different nations. And I think that in itself is unique. So on one hand, it seems it's totally new, that concept of less nationalistic viewpoints is hard to it's hard to understand, I guess. You know, but basically that's what it is. You've got a whole new movement of all of these different nationalities working together. That in itself must be hard to justify sometimes.
So it's kind of like the UN of music?
I really think so.
Yeah.
I really think so. And so now that's a new kind of classical music. You know, even when you had French classical music, Russian classical music, German classical music, Italian classical music, in the end it was still European classical music.
Yes.
Right? So now you really got French classical music, Korean classical music, Indian classical music. It's like a world force.
From my understanding, with a lot of your work, not only do you, of course, perform and make amazing albums, from the 70s and onwards, but you've also devoted, quite a bit of your time to teaching and, can I say, mentoring another generation of folks.
One of my biggest inspirations is this man, well, it's almost hard to even call him a man, this prophet that we call John Coltrane. And when asked a few times of what he was trying to do with his music, he said, I simply want to be a force for good. You know, and it was a very meaningful statement for me, to want to take the responsibility to uplift the community. You know, not just to use their euphoria, personal gain or whatever, even though you're sharing, but to sincerely want to uplift the community. I think Coltrane, that way of saying, be a force for good, is extremely inspiring for me. On the other hand, who else is going to do it? I mean, evidently, I have a certain amount of experience, and and you don't realize that until people respond to you like that. They'll just say, "Oh man, you know this, and you know this, and you know this," and of course, my tendency is to take it for granted because I have mentors that I'm still learning from and trying to decipher their messages. But to hear somebody say, "Wow, we're getting that from you," I'm just beginning to see that as a possible reality. I hate to be like that, but this whole thing is, even though it's late, it's kind of new to me.
the first Sachon International Jazz Workshop this year from August 5th to 17th. World-renowned jazz musicians were invited to spend some quality time with some 40 participants, and among them was the Billy Hart Quartet. Billy Hart stayed at the workshop from the early morning until late in the evening to show his distinct music style to the participants, and he didn't show a hint of fatigue. With professional and amateur musicians and jazz enthusiasts from all over Korea watching him, Billy Hart gave the performance of a lifetime.
Thank God for music, because I don't know what I would do sometimes if I didn't have music. You know, music makes me optimistic. It makes me think that certain things are not as bad.
After his passionate performance, the living jazz legend was bombarded with questions from all directions. The audience seemed to have been enraptured by his explosive energy and the powerful beats they had never heard before.
Texture for me means
항상 뵐 때마다 너무 놀랍고 진짜 태어날 때부터 그 재즈라는 역사와 함께 자란 분이시기 때문에 그냥 뭐 여기서 아무리 제가 노력하고 해도 몰랐던 사실들을 이렇게 실제로 듣게 되고 또 연주를 직접 보니까 더 많이 와닿았고.
그 40년에 태어나셨더라고요, 알고 보니까. 그래서 그때 그 음반에서 들었던 그런 소리, 그리고 느낌, 그런 것들이 그대로 직접 전달이 되더라고요.
You're here with your Billy Hart Quartet, and you've got some incredible people who are part of that quartet. You've got Mark Turner, who's just this world-renowned saxophonist, and Ethan, who's the amazing pianist, and Ben, you know, the curly-haired bassist. And it's such a profoundly talented group of people. I'm curious how you were able to kind of decide to work with each of them.
Well, obviously they're all a lot younger than I am, so I had to become aware of them. And the person that made me most aware of them was Ethan. So that's how I became aware of them, or aware of the possibility of us interacting. Right, so that's, but then to find out we had a certain compatibility was illuminating, enlightening, you know, inspiring. That's all I can say. So in a sense, because of fate, or they chose me, or it would seem like they chose me.
My guess is that a lot of artists, musicians, want to work with you. And you've worked with some of the most incredible people, you know, in the history of modern music. And I mean, the list, you know, goes on and on and on.
I have to say, if there are any of these reasons, I had to have been extraordinarily fortunate, extremely lucky. You know, of course, I didn't know it at the time. But as I got older and as I moved around the world, you know, it was obvious that I knew some things. I was familiar with some things that a lot of other people weren't, and I didn't know that at first. And you know, to know for like a drum student that I know the original drummer with James Brown, you know, that innovated these break beats that you don't even know about until you get to the Dave Matthews Band, or right, or somebody like, you know, Billy Kilson or something, right? You know, that I knew, you know, because this guy, his name wasn't on the record in those days. And it was lucky that James Brown even had his name on the record. But look what a major innovation that came from, right? And I was right there. I was right there. Another event that was similar an advantage for me was there was a guitarist in Washington, D.C. that had his own nightclub. He was so popular as a guitarist, he had his own nightclub but he was so popular that he visited Brazil, and there his band discovered something we now relate to as the bossa nova or Brazilian music. So actually, the music became popular through this man, Charlie Bird, right? So because he was in Washington, D.C., I was familiar with that music way before anybody else was. Not only from hearing it, but being able to perform with some of these people, like Antonio Carlos Jobim, you know, João Gilberto, Elis Regina, Chico Buarque. I mean, you know, that's something people are still trying to understand. You know what I'm saying? But I was lucky to get it from the horse's mouth. You know, people now study this music. You know, the music. What was it? Black Orpheus, the movie. You know, I was seeing these people as they were making the movie. Right.
Wow.
But you know, again, that was a kind of thing that I took for granted. I mean, you know, just a little drummer in Washington, D.C. I wasn't necessarily a major metropolis. You know, it wasn't New York, it wasn't Los Angeles, it wasn't Chicago. It was just Washington. But all of this was happening at that time.
Yeah. It seems like there's a little bit of serendipity and fate kind of for how you were even in Washington, D.C. at that time. And you know, sometimes we just never know why we're at a certain place.
Right.
But you know, certainly I know a lot of Korean jazz enthusiasts are excited about the fact that you are as well versed in your craft.
There was an intelligentsia, or as you will, of intellectual thought, of academic thought in Washington, D.C. So to say nothing of the fact, of course, Duke Ellington is from Washington, D.C.
Yes.
Right, so I mean, there was a history there. My earliest understandings of people like Lester Young and Billie Holiday used to perform there. You know, that was one of the main places you could go to hear them. Charlie Parker, you know, those kinds of things. So it was a scene. It was a scene before I got there. Actually, it was a scene before I got there. When I got there, it was already happening. When I got there, it was a changing of the guard. This new Afro-American pop music that was referred to as rhythm and blues this is one of the strongholds. Washington, D.C. was one of the strongholds for that because it wasn't as popular in the North American media as it was in the Afro-American communities. So a lot of these guys, a lot of these innovators from the South would come to Washington, D.C. on their way to New York, but they weren't popular enough to bring their own bands. So we got a chance to perform with them.
So by being in that location kind of halfway between the South and New York, you got the privilege of being able to play with all kinds of people.
And seeing the evolution and seeing the innovation firsthand. You know, I mean, to see Ray Charles or James Brown or Otis Redding or I can't even think of all their names, Jackie Wilson, Sam Cooke.
Yes.
And to see that in person before, they became this really popular.
A celebrated legend that left a mark in the history of jazz, Billy Hart. Despite the age gap between him and the rest of the band members, they still demonstrate fantastic teamwork when they perform together on stage, and even wow the audience with their improvisational skills. The Billy Hart Quartet has been together for more than 10 years. What did the other members think of their leader?
Amazing. I mean, he's a living master and of a very long tradition that goes back beyond jazz.
I feel like an apprentice, so I feel like I know my place very clearly, and even if I had other opinions that were wrong, his drumming would quickly correct those.
Billy is the tradition, and he made the history, so you know, it's a thrill to anything he would say about any of it. You know what I mean? I'm always just hanging on every word, like, wow, you know, that's right, you did that too. You know.
The perfect blend of the intricate sounds is what makes them shine on stage.
Billy, I'd love to ask you about how it is that you decided to pursue music.
Well, by the time I went to the University for Engineering, I was already into music. Divine providence. I was coming from baseball practice, and I was going to visit my grandmother. And at that point, she had retired, so she lived in an apartment complex. But I got there before she got there. So I was just waiting for her to come, and I was standing in the hall, and this lady came out in the hall, and she said, you know, basically she was uncomfortable with having somebody loitering in the hall. You know, I guess she was afraid it could be some kind of criminal intent or something. And I said, well, I'm waiting for my grandmother. And she said, well, you can't wait here. So that was kind of harsh. But then it was the softer side. Well, you can wait in my apartment. And her husband, as we speak, is still the best jazz saxophone player in Washington, D.C. Even though I was this die-hard rock and roll fan, he gave me my first Charlie Parker record. And
Interesting.
And I, for whatever reason, I'll never know why I fell in love with that record, but I fell desperately in love with it. You know, it was two records. One was just the acoustic quartet, and then the other one, well, there were two 78s. So I guess he was giving me these records because now he was going to have a new hi-fi system, and he had no need for the 78s.
I see.
So he gave me, one was two sides of this acoustic band, and the other was two sides of Charlie Parker with a string ensemble. And so I had these two master works, and maybe with the strings I related through my grandmother or whatever, or the acoustics I related by my mother and father. But all I know is once I heard this, I became really infatuated with this music. And that's before I even played the instrument.
Wow.
You know, I began to want to play the instrument because of the music, and it just so happens, again, there was a kid that lived down the street that had a drum set. Maybe if it was a kid that lived down the street that had a piano, I would have become a piano player. But the kid lived down the street, he had a drum set, so I started playing on the drums.
Wow. Now, there was no formal training of doing the drums for you, was
No, there was not. There was this weird kid that went to high school with me that was 2 years older than me. Really strange kid, but he was a guitarist. And evidently while I was having these reactions on the drum set in the basement, he would come by my house and look in the window and watch me. And this went on for over a year before he let me know. And he was advanced on the instrument, and his brother was advanced on the instrument. So he began to talk to me, and then he invited me to go with him, with them, to play.
To play together.
Yeah, well, not even, but at least to watch. And now I'm not only watching this music, like you said, seeing it in person, but now I'm seeing professional musicians, professional jazz musicians, at the top of their game at this high art. I'm privileged to be just sitting there saying, well, it wasn't Miles Davis, but somebody like that. I'm sitting as close as I am to this camera right here, just watching this and seeing how they do it. Nobody's saying, kid, this is how you do this, but I have a drum set at home, and I'm just watching this guy do it. So now when I go back home, I've got this lesson by one of the greatest practitioners of the art in the world.
As a student at Howard, and you were doing your engineering degree and also playing on the side, and whether you were happy and celebrating something or upset about something, going always to your music, then Shirley Horn contacted you to work with her. Is that right?
Yeah.
How was that decision made for you to go and work with her?
Well, first of all, it was her. I mean, I didn't even know she was famous or would be famous. All I knew is she was playing this music that I loved so much. So, and of course, a chance to learn. But obviously, that's the way I'm learning from being around these people.
Yes.
But the other reason was that college institutions are expensive. And I thought, wow, this is a way to help my parents pay my tuition. Right? Yeah, well, I'll take some time off, but I'll have the money to do this. And that really was my reasoning.
Interesting.
I wasn't thinking, oh man, I'm going to start this music career, because I didn't know what a music career was. You know, I mean, Buck Hill worked in the post office. You know, these guys, I didn't know what Shirley Horn did. I just knew that she was played this music that was divine, and that she was physically extraordinarily attractive at the time.
You know, when you were about in your late 30s, I guess it was 36, 37 when you actually released the album, some people might say that, you've gotten 20 years of jazz and performing experience under your belt. Why did it take so long for you to just release your first album? Or maybe some people are saying that that was quite early for you to release an album. What do you say about that? Was it early for you? Was it too not too late, but was it late for you?
Well, I was so I never thought of it as the next step. A lot of people have reasons for it to be the next step. A next step is to acknowledge you as the next step, that you want to be a leader, or you want to present your point of view in such a way that you think other people either want or need to hear it. I didn't feel that way. I enjoyed just working on it, a work in progress. So a couple of people nudged me like that and said, well, and I said, well, okay, maybe I'll give it a shot. And then I remember when I made my choice of musicians and the concept, the album was it was received in two different ways. When it came out or whatever, the New York Times picked it as number 13 as one of the best 100 records recorded that year. But the record label, the record company that I was on, the guy that took it over was a guy he was different than the guy that had produced the record. It was a new guy, and his concept was more commercial music. My concept didn't fit his concept, and that's basically what happened. I mean, we had some clashes. I didn't know, but basically he just told me, he said, you know, Billy, to tell you the truth, I just don't like your kind of music. That was something to think about, you know. Say, wait a minute, I've got a certain amount of experience. I made a great record, it was acknowledged. And what? And it's rejected, you know. So, and meanwhile, I'm getting calls and I'm recording with other people, everything's going well, you know.
You've collaborated with some of the world's most renowned musicians in this art form of jazz, this classical American music, and there's so many that you've worked with. What were some differences with making that album as opposed to performing live?
Well, you're not sharing with the audience, but you're sharing with the other members of the ensemble, right? You know, you're sharing and interacting with people that you respect and appreciate. So you're in the act of co-composition, co-composing, experimenting or exploring together. You know, you see people that go excavating, right, or whatever they're looking for, Tutankhamun or mummies or just gold, prospectors or whatever, but you're looking for it together, or oil, you know. You know, what happens when a guy strikes oil? He's not depressed by it. You know, he's excited about it. He wants to share that, you know. Say, wow, you know, I got it, and you are happy for him. So I think it's more like that. We were, you know, you're interacting in a way that you know that you're doing something valuable, and if it works for you, then you think it's going to work for people that are listening too. You know, the audience, the record buying public or whatever. I had a little example, and now it's escaping me. I might give it another second to see if I can find it.
Billy, we would be so thrilled and honored if you wouldn't mind performing for us here on the stage, to have you show not only me but our audience members just, you know, what it's like to perform. It would be a great honor. Would you mind?
I'd be happy to.
Great.
I'd be so happy to.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Billy, you look like you are in really great shape. I don't know how you keep up with this incredible schedule that you have. You teach at Oberlin, the New England Conservatory of Music. You play gigs on the side. You're recording albums, and you're doing workshops, traveling thousands of miles everywhere to do these things. How do you do it?
Well, it reminds me of a joke that I'm kind of tell you the whole thing, but the answer is you ought to see the inside. But I don't know. I just I've tried to discourage students from doing that. I say, there's more to life than just music, right? And it's taken me a long time to be really sure of that. But it's really at a point now where I don't know anything else. There's the rest of the world. So I'm in the part of a very small community of people, and of course most of those people are very young, and so they're still optimistic and excited about the future. But I can see now that you can have a more well-rounded lifestyle, a more balanced lifestyle.
Do you feel like your life was not balanced for a while?
For a while, it's still not balanced. Of course, there are other people that were like that. I don't know why I thought of this guy, General MacArthur.
Yes.
I don't know who are these guys? Babe Ruth, certainly Duke Ellington or John Coltrane, or these people whose whole life was their art. I don't know. Picasso, did he have a balanced life?
So maybe the goal is to be unbalanced.
Well,
if you want to be good at your craft.
Then I'm still trying to follow that carrot or whatever it is. I'm still looking for whatever that is. I'm still trying to grow and to explore, to experiment. I'm still, I guess, as passionate about it as I always was. Now, I don't know why.
As someone who has kind of perfected his craft and is continuing to develop and grow, if there is an important factor that determines how a drummer can improve his or her skills, that one important factor that influences how they perform and how they train, what do you think that would be?
Well, you have to believe in it. You have to believe in it. And what makes you believe? So you have to be passionate about it, I guess. So, how many ways cause passion that's that intense? So it would be spiritual, or maybe even sensual.
Billy, would you be able to describe how your drumming style has changed from your debut till now?
Well, I have the confidence to try things. I say confidence as opposed to courage that I believe in. I was just able to realize it physically or something, or more clearly now than I could then. And of course, I needed to go through all these different situations. There's different angles. Maybe at one point I could see it from this angle, but if I go over here, I couldn't see it. Or I couldn't go see it that way, or I could see it from that angle. Now I can basically see it from all the angles.
Billy, what are some of your future plans? You've certainly got a lot going on in your life right now.
Well, there's something about this ensemble. As a composer, I feel I'm the least sophisticated of the group. You know, being an older person, I feel I wasn't around when jazz education, I'm around before jazz education was so prevalent. Now you have this education in all the major institutions in the United States and Europe, and now evidently in Korea.
Yes.
But when I came along, none of that existed. So, and given the instrument, I never really had a chance to really study academically as much as the younger guys. You know, all the younger guys now, the whole faculty, and one of the guys is not even a member of our band, but they basically all meet each other in college. They don't meet on the street. When I met people, we met on the street, you know, and which could be distracted by a lot of other things that are on the street, which has been written about in movies about those distractions, you know. But so I feel I'm the least sophisticated as a composer of the members in the group. So to combat that in a harsh and cruel way, they forced me to compose more. So a couple of those pieces were my compositions.
Could you tell us what was maybe one of your more favorites?
What, of mine? Oh, I don't know if I have any favorites. It's a work in progress. I'm learning, so there's just it's more like a song or a concept or a melody that you hear in the shower that you're able to share with an audience. That's the way I feel about it, and if they sort of like it or whatever, it's sort of like you enjoy seeing a guy or a lady walking down the street whistling or humming a song, and you sort of feel compatible with them. You know, they seem either happy or sad or whatever, but you can relate to it. You know, and I feel that's what I'm giving my audience, that they sort of can relate to this this little piece. That's on one hand, and on the other hand, that sometimes I get a little bit of critical acclaim for it.
Billy Hart delivered another brilliant performance under the splendid lighting on a summer night. Once again, he poured his heart and soul into his performance and captivated the audience with an enticing jazz sound. As soon as he takes the stage, he lets his body flow to the dynamic drum beats his hands create in order to convey his heartfelt emotions and communicate with the audience.
Billy, last but not least, I would like to ask you, what does drumming and jazz mean to you?
So I'll just give you a reaction. I was doing some kind of master class at a jazz festival in Chicago. And, well, you don't know this, we haven't talked about it, but we discussed me not having a lot of clear academic instruction. But in fact, traveling around the country, I met not very many, but many people that took it upon themselves to teach me. I mean, I've had guys just come to me and say, man, you need to know this. Even though they weren't in the situation that I was. I was lucky to be in a situation, and maybe they deserved it more than I did. But their way of interacting was to help me, right? And so I had all these people teach me these things. I mean, amazing things that they taught me. So there we are again, luck, just total luck. I had these people. So I was in Chicago doing it, and one of these people showed up. I hadn't seen him in years, 20 years, maybe even 30 years, but he showed up. And so just to see him, was warm. So he came to, now I'm similar to where I'm now. People are there to hear me give my opinion.
Yes.
So they said something about what is drumming or what does this mean to you or whatever. And I don't know what I said, but he interrupted the thing. He said, the drum is the heartbeat. The drum is the heartbeat. It is, and it's not even that abstract. Probably the invention of the drum comes from the heartbeat. The function of it is because this. So as you think, whatever you think of the heartbeat is what gives you life or whatever, but that's what it is.
Billy, you have given us such a gift in your time with me and the show, and I know that the audience members that are watching the show from all around the world are going to be very much impacted by just your wisdom and being inspired by hearing you play. And I believe that not only have you influenced a lot of the people that you've worked with over the years, but your presence here in Korea and helping a lot of the music enthusiasts here will create perhaps another form of jazz or music that, who knows, in many years to come will have its own flavor, maybe even fused with Korean traditional classical music. You never know, right? So I just really thank you so much for all of your wisdom and your time and your humor and your stories. It's been such a treat for me to have you here. So thank you so much for giving of your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for being a part of my journey, I guess. An amazing part of my journey.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.